there's a real crisis at the moment, as we all know, with not being able to sort of justify the costs of building in terms of construction costs and cost of borrowing, and investors are investing in different things, whereas property was always a safe bet. So I think that there's a real time of reckoning at the moment in terms of the central government, the regional government with the GLA and the boroughs, understanding they need to work much more closely with developers and contractors and designers in a way they never did before, in order to meet these, solve a lot of these problems we have.
Hello and welcome to Talking Place, the podcast bringing placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place. I'm your host, Tanisha Raffiuddin. I am the founder of Concept Culture, a creative agency in London passionate about creating purposeful brands and telling powerful stories. In this episode, it is my absolute pleasure to talk place with Max Farrell. Max is the founder and CEO of the LDN Collective, a dynamic network of built environment specialists fighting to improve people's lives and the planet's prospects. I'm proud to say that I am also a member of the LDN Collective. Max's work covers urban planning, strategic communications, and impactful projects focused on placemaking, social value, and regeneration. We cover a lot of ground in this episode around the power of the community in shaping viable, resilient, and inclusive places, and why the community should be part of the design team right from the beginning of the brief. Please do stick around till the end. All right, let's talk place. Max, welcome to Talking Place, the podcast where we bring placemakers and storytellers together to talk about place.
Thanks, Tanisha. Yeah, and thanks for having me.
What a pleasure. And obviously, we've done this in the reverse order before, where I've been a guest on your fabulous Collectively Speaking podcast. Obviously, we've known each other for a long time now, over 5 years, I'd say. But for our listeners out there, why don't we start by a little introduction from yourself?
Okay, well, thanks, Tanisha. And so my name's Max Farrell, and I'm the chief exec and founder of the LDN Collective. And that is a group of members who have different skill sets, and we collaborate on projects together that have a social and environmental agenda. So we've got about 50 members, and they do a range of things, but we tend to specialize in either placemaking and urban design, branding and communications with great organizations like yours, and also social value, community engagement, and co-design is a very sort of distinct area as well. So yeah, that's the sort of the overview of what we do.
Sounds amazing, and it's very much encompasses probably all the roles, or at least most of the roles that you would come across when creating places or within the placemaking skill set, if you like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was partly what sort of led me to test out whether this sort of business model would work. Is that I was previously at Farrell's architecture and urban design practice that works internationally and often on quite large scale projects. And when you're working at those scales and you're creating kind of new pieces of city or completely new settlements out in what are rural areas, then there's such a massive range and spectrum of different types of skill sets and disciplines needed to plan, design, and then curate places like that, even on the smaller scale, but particularly when it comes to large scale mixed use regeneration projects. And I remember when as part of the process of sort of coming up with the idea, I listed out all the different types of professions that were involved in one of our biggest projects at Farrell's at the time. And they got to, if you include everything from sort of planning, design, all the specialisms like social impact and zero carbon, and then the storytelling as well. And storytelling has a huge amount of different sort of disciplines, as you know, within that, whether that's sort of film, graphic design, communications. Then I got to a number of about 50, and I thought, well, that's you know, and that's interesting because it's a bit like making a film, where when you see the credits at the end of the film and they just go on and on and on, and you just think there's all these types of job titles that I don't even really understand what they are often because they're so specialist. But in order to make a great film or a great place, you need all of those people, and so what that sort of led me on to think was that's why we have these big corporate sort of multidisciplinaries is because they have to be a home for so many different disciplines if they're going to be a one-stop shop. But they inherently then have to carry with them a lot of overheads. If you've got 10,000 staff with departments for each of those 50 disciplines, if you like, then you're going to need big office buildings, and there's going to be lots of costly bills, and you're going to need a big HR department, and so that's one element of it. But the other element is, I think these days, particularly when I set this up 5 years ago, it's so much easier for individuals and SMEs to be connected and to work in, particularly through technology now. The fact we're doing a podcast on in the virtual world is testament to that. But so I just don't like the idea of having a network of people that were self-employed or running their own businesses that could come together more on a sort of project by project basis and then disband. And then, different configurations might work with each other on different types of projects. And I wasn't sure if it was going to work, but luckily it has. And the fact we've been going for 5 years is sort of proof of that. And we're doing some really interesting things, as you know, and have done some great projects that I'm really proud of.
Amazing. And you know, one of the things that attracted me to the LDN Collective to become a member all those years ago was exactly what you said, that this was the first time I was seeing a group or a collective talk about placemaking and storytelling together under one umbrella. And that was the time, obviously, I was transitioning from being a traditional architect into more of place storytelling and place branding. And so this absolutely caught my eye. And I remember this also during the early times of COVID. So we had only met online. And exactly as you said, that was also the time when everyone was online and everyone was, only operating digitally. So I think it was a really good catalyzing moment for the LDN Collective and like small businesses, virtual businesses like myself, to band together and do good work. And certainly our business, Concept Culture, has benefited immensely from being a part of the LDN Collective, both in terms of establishing the brand and the story early on in the onset, and launching your digital marketing and your newsletter and whatnot, but also working on projects together and collaborating on things together, and just being part of this larger network, as you say. Very committed, passionate individual, and authentically wanting to deliver and create good places. At least that's why I'm very proud to be part of the LDN Collective.
Yeah, well, you've been and concept culture have been a really important part of that whole journey. It's been quite a sort of symbiotic relationship, hasn't it, in the sense that you have really helped the LDN Collective brand grow through designing the website and running our social media channels, which have been fantastic. But also then there's a reciprocal thing because that helps get you in front of different clients and collaborators that you might not have done. So in a way, it's like I see it like a sort of living organism where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. And in these kind of very economic turmoil and crisis after crisis, it helps to be agile, it helps to be virtual, it helps to be nimble, so you can react to briefs very quickly, like you said, without the large overhead and all the bureaucracy that may come with working with a
Exactly.
larger organization. Um, Anyway, so let's get into the meat of it. And this is a question, these are a couple of questions I pose to everybody, but I'd like to understand your definition of place. So, what does place mean to you? And if you want to talk about what a good place is, then we'd love to hear it.
Okay. That's the $1 million question, isn't it,
Mm,
for if you're in our industry? But
yeah.
I think most people just instinctively know a good place and somewhere that you want to be, and you want to either revisit or set up roots, or and they all tend to have certain things in common, even though they're all unique. No place is the same, but a good place compared to I was going to say a bad place, but it's probably better to say a non-place. A good place is somewhere that is very uh, sort of it's layered in the sense that there's lots of different ways of reading it and experiencing it, depending on who you are and what you're looking to do in that place, because everyone is different, and I think that that's where and every person has a different experience of place, so I think that a good place works on a number of different levels. That's the first thing, and then there's certain elements that are always have in common, which is good quality public realm. I think our industry has often in the past particularly focused too much on the buildings and not actually what goes on in and around them, which is where life plays out. And
Mm,
good quality public realm is also about being connected to nature and feeling like you are part of the natural world, even within a city. And I remember, obviously, I was sort of brought up within this industry with a father who's an architect and a planner, and he was always really passionate about the fact that cities are amazingly diverse ecosystems. You often have more nature, more species of plants and insects in a city than you do out in the countryside. In fact, you invariably do. So kind of planning for that, understanding that is really important. And often some non-places tend to forget that, and you feel and it's all very grey and hard standing, and there isn't that connection to nature that people need in order to have sort of good physical and mental health, but also to be in places that resonate with them, and you feel connected as part of the natural world. So I think that's one important thing, sort of nature and public realm, but also good places have a mix of uses. And I think the places that are nowadays are sort of failing, or at least kind of going through periods of transformation, are the places that were monocultural. So whether that's sort of out of town shopping centres or airports, or these are places that are now becoming revitalizing as much more mixed use, because at the end of the day, places, cities are where human beings congregate and live out their lives, and humans don't just need to be able to shop or need to be able to go and get a plane. They need to be able to get their hair cut, to have see a dentist, to buy some flowers, to there's all this stuff that's often not planned for in our sort of quite rigid zoning type system certainly in the past. But I think that is definitely much more recognised now, and you see all the good master planners out there at the moment that really get that, and also take people with them on that journey of why they should put up with the disruption of 15 years of construction or whatever it is, or 2 years up to 15 years, but in order to enjoy and benefit from the end result.
absolutely. And I love what you said about cities being ecosystems. I'm very much a city person. I've lived in cities all my life. I can't visualize myself in any environment other than a city. But uh, definitely, I would also appreciate more public realm, more green spaces. And we're fortunate to live in a city like London, which has a lot of greenery, and not other cities are as fortunate to have those, both planned and natural assets. But I want to also pick up on something you talked about, uh, places that are now failing, and they're because they were monolithic or monocultural, as you said, and they had rigid zoning. And I think that relates to, human life is messy. The human life is not rigid, and like you said, we have various needs and wants as people, which are not always can be confined within a gridiron master plan. That's why me growing up in Asia, and in particular in Mumbai, with the very organic cities, which are successful in their own right. And then as a young architect studying about the work of Corbusier, who was invited to design the new cities of the free India, like Chandigarh and Gandhinagar, for example. And those cities were designed on vastly European or North American principles of the gridiron, and they didn't see as much success as the more organically grown cities. And so it just took me back as you were talking to that analogy of an city that grows organically versus a planned city that may not always account for the messiness of human life, if you like.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. It's often people try and impose an order on a place without really, rather than creating the conditions for a place to evolve and grow. And I think and in a way, that's the difference between top-down planning and bottom-up. And I think historically, we've always done much more top-down urban planning, and more often than not that does fail because you're trying to impose a sort of artificial order on a place that goes against the grain of nature, and but there's a real movement now to kind of do the opposite, whether that's sort of co-design, community-led design, which is, if you're going to do bottom up, you have to do that with the people that are going to be inhabiting that place, which in traditionally in other cultures that are less professionalized, that happens as a matter of course. You kind of everyone grows their own bit of their place, and together it combines, and you have centers. But I think somehow along the way that got lost. So there's a sort of the bottom up in that sense is very important.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll touch up upon some of the terminologies that you've talked about, like co-design and social value. But before we do that, now I want to ask you a personal question. So what is your favorite place in the world?
Well, as somebody that created an organization called the London Collective, you might not be surprised to learn that,
Okay.
that it's Manchester. No, not really. It definitely is. I do love Manchester, but actually, I can't. London is just such an incredible city, and I was very fortunate to have a father who was very obsessed with London and even wrote a book called Shaping London that taught me so much about the way it works. Um, but just having been born and bred here, and there's something kind of almost inherently within my DNA that I feel like it's home, and I love traveling, but I love coming home even more than the traveling. and, and London is just such a unique place, and I think someone recently in the media called it the invincible city, and I thought that was quite
Mm.
interesting because over the sort of couple of thousand years that it's been grown since the Romans, came and the two original centres at the City of London and the City of Westminster, and how it's evolved as a sort of series of urban villages that have all coalesced in a sort of polycentric way, makes it very resilient as a sort of as a ecological sort of organism change and to adaptation and to whether it's about COVID and that we all had to live locally, and London was very well suited to that with all these local centres within the metropolis, but also in terms of expanding and contracting, because not that long ago that London was contracting, and but it's been through a period of expansion, and now is a real sort of is a bit of a tipping point now because it's almost become a victim of its own success in the sense that it is such a popular and well-loved city, but equally it's become so unaffordable to so many people, and actually there's a real crisis at the moment, as we all know, with not being able to sort of justify the costs of building in terms of construction costs and cost of borrowing, and investors are investing in different things, whereas property was always a safe bet. So I think that there's a real time of reckoning at the moment in terms of the central government, the regional government with the GLA and the boroughs understanding they need to work much more closely with developers and contractors and designers in a way they never did before in order to meet these, solve a lot of these problems we have. Make it so that people who are absolutely crucial to London working properly, the nurses, the street cleaners, the cooks, the teachers, that they don't get priced out, because then we won't have a city that is the reason we love it is because it caters for everybody, and and it has that quality of life. But if it becomes a more elitist sort of playground, then it would be a real different place, and it would start to lose its appeal.
Wow, I can absolutely resonate with what you said. I mean, London is also one of my most favorite places to live, and it's now my second home. And I travel a lot, and I always love coming back home. I visited how many ever cities, I've lost count, but I always compare them to London, which is probably unfair because each city has its own special, unique characteristics. But I I absolutely love the invisible city, the notion. Even we talk about economic downturn, but we always think, oh, London will be fine. London is resilient, but more to your point about it should be open to all. And I would hate, I cannot, hate is a strong word, but I would really dislike it if it were to grow into this elitist playground, as you mentioned, like some other cities in the world are. I think the key to its success is that um, it, you know, it, I don't know, it hugs everybody, welcomes, it can be welcoming, but it is, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a tough city to survive in, especially now in 2025. And during COVID, when we realized a lot of us were non-essential to, to society. And exactly as you said, we shouldn't be pricing out the key workers. Like in some other cities, like the elite live in the centers and all the support staff live in the surroundings, and then they have to commute an hour, 2 hours, and just reduces their quality of life, as you've pointed out. So a lot to unpack, there. But specifically, for those who are listening, you talked about places today. So if someone were to start from scratch, draw a town from scratch, as you do at the LDN Collective, what are the key elements you would include, or how would you go about creating this space that is not just functional, but viable, vibrant, and inclusive?
Yeah, yeah, great question. And well, as you know, we are actually fortunate enough at the moment to be master planning a new town, a new market town in Huntingdonshire, um, with about sort of 4,500 homes. Is often the first thing that people talk about, the number of homes, but actually in order to create a sustainable community, you need so much more than that. And it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about that sort of diversity and mix of uses, and creating a community is not easy. But if you're going to do that, you need to have all the right sort of services there in terms of education and health, with through the whole life cycle of people's lives, from primary school, secondary school, links to further education. And then in terms of employment opportunities, that's also very difficult to plan from the outset, because if you just drop yourself anywhere in London and you kind of look around, you'll see a whole range of different types of employment, whether it's on the high street or whether it's in the offices or in the factories or the labs that you often don't see. So that's what I think our project that we're working on is called Sibson, west of Peterborough, and I think it's been fascinating. And actually, one of our team, Vicky, is going to be presenting it to the Newtowns Task Force and relatively soon, as an exemplar for you know how to approach things like density. Is often you underestimate how important that is in terms of getting it right, not just from the point of how you can create a place that is human and scale and livable, but also in terms of costs and viability, particularly now a lot of the regulations around things like second stairs and the price of things like lifts and but also about quality of life, and people tend to want to be as connected as possible to street level. That's where life plays out. So we've done a lot of work on density, and obviously being a sort of garden town, it is much lower density than a city, but equally not too low density, because that's where a lot of problems are in the suburbs, where you have lots of detached houses with two or three parking spaces, and then people end up getting in their car to drive anywhere, and then you don't have a case to create public transport, because if people aren't using it, it won't pay for itself. So being able to plan public transport, walkability, and cycling, or wheeling, actually, because these days just as many people get on the scooters and e-scooters and so on. But at the infrastructure that goes with all that, whether that's sort of car sharing, electric vehicles that need charging, um, or the right sort of road and street patterns to encourage walking and cycling, is critically important. And then making sure that those are not all sort of tarmac. It's actually about green infrastructure, and that is doubles as urban drainage. And those kind of things are really important. So yeah, we're lucky within the collective to have really good people on things like socioeconomics that have developed the whole strategy for the employment, and it's about different scales of businesses and different types of businesses that have synergies with each other, and that has a particular identity. So in Simpson, it's all about sort of green technology and manufacturing. And luckily, we have a client who has already invested in a lot of those types of businesses, whether that's solar panels or hydrogen or waste to energy. So they understand the journey that those businesses take, from sort of startups or university graduates right the way through to, I don't know, unicorn businesses, which we seem to be good at and particularly in that region of the Oxford to Cambridge corridor. Um, but yeah, so I think to answer your question, that's it's about really being not just environmentally sustainable, which I think we understand a lot better now as an industry, but socially sustainable. And that means a whole range of different types of housing as well. You know, there's if you're going to cater for a diverse population, you need housing for families, for older people, you need housing for students, you need housing for people that either want to rent or to buy, and to have that mix is critically important. And I think Darren Rodwell, the former leader of Barking and Dagenham, used to always talk about housing as infrastructure, and I think we would do well to sort of recognise that. It's not just rail and roads that's infrastructure. It's actually housing. Is how if you're gonna because once people have a safe and secure home, everything else can fall into place, and whether that's their education or employment or health, But without it, if it's unaffordable or if it's unsuitable, or and so many people still having to live with their parents and all the pressures that's putting on intergenerationally, housing is the big issue at the moment, and I think it's something that we as collectively, as an industry and government, need to double down on.
Absolutely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there about, if we solve the housing crisis, um, we will definitely be able to elevate our collective health and well-being. And recently, we've been talking about health creation at the LDN Collective as well. And the recent Healthy City Design Congress that I attended, thanks to your invitation, opened my eyes into the fact that the built environment is where you create health, and a hospital or other healthcare institutions should only be the last resort. They should only be cure, but prevention can begin in the built environment.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it is fundamental to in terms of, and I think that that's a really interesting conference, by the way, the Healthy City Design Congress, and I would recommend anyone going, because they do learn from other cities around the world, and I think that kind of knowledge sharing is so important, because there's great things happening in other cities, but also around our own country as well. There's some really pioneering stuff going on. Like, for example, at Stockton, where the local authority bought a failing shopping centre, which was on the river, and it was sort of it was a very blighted and dysfunctional building that was no longer fit for purpose. And they took it down and they created a park. And actually, by doing that, they've improved the quality of life of residents, but they've also improved the value of the surrounding properties and businesses. So it was kind of like a win-win, rather than doing the obvious thing of building something else there in its place. They actually created some green infrastructure, and I think that's really very interesting.
Absolutely, that's a really good example to share. I want to come back to something you said earlier about top-down versus bottom-up planning. Um, and I would wager a guess that at the heart of the bottom-up planning is the community. So, in your view, what role can the community play in creating successful, viable, and thriving places?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think what one of our mantras at Farrell's was that the place is the client, and I think increasingly people are recognizing that we need to treat existing communities, as the client too. And but in doing that, you need to bring them into the conversation really, really early on, and you have to understand that they're a huge resource, and there's an enormous amount to learn from them, and that if you don't do that, then you're kind of like you're flying blind, because you don't really understand what is needed, and you can't kind of start to plan or design a place unless you understand what the people need and what's missing, and what's working and what isn't, and that's but the only way of doing that is by having those conversations. So I think being able to spend time early on understanding the needs, the hopes and fears of the community will pay massive dividends later on. And you can tell the sorts of regeneration projects and the types of clients that do that now and do it well. There's always more quality outcomes, and actually it tends to be a smoother process as well, because you're not going to get in big battles halfway, where you're unveiling things that aren't popular and people say they feel like they're not being listened to, because you actually get people to take ownership, because they've been involved in the decision making. So it's kind of, in a way, it's not sort of rocket science, but equally it's hard to do. It's hard to do. And I think that's because, you need to be good at listening, and you need to be understanding and relating to all different types of cultures and people with different physical abilities and different age groups and genders and ethnicities, and actually those things are what makes a place special in the first place. So you have to sort of really do the work to understand that, understand, what the community is, what they want, and turn that into your brief.
Absolutely. And so you mentioned there's some successful regeneration projects out there that have done them well. Are there any examples that come to mind, or any place that has inspired you and like, oh gosh, they got it. They really got it right.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good question. I think it's quite hard to think of more modern sort of projects. I think that places that have evolved over time are really special. Whether that's sort of I don't know, Covent Garden or Soho, or those places that we recognise as being very thriving, very inclusive and popular, and places that people enjoy spending time in, but then I suppose more recently, I mean, there's good examples of where there's been collaboration between public bodies, local government, and developers, and the communities. Like King's Cross is obviously an obvious example that everyone uses, but I think there's other examples not many people know. But King's Cross client Argent, we first got to know them when even before my time at Farrell's, when Farrell's did the master plan for Brindley Place in Birmingham, and that was quite similar to King's Cross in the sense it was post-industrial. It had a canal that it turned its back on. It had kind of old buildings that were derelict and falling apart. And rather than knock them down, they were sort of reused and seen as assets. But the key thing at Brindley Place was that there was a central public square, and then the buildings were arranged around it, which is a very fundamental placemaking approach. People like to be able to congregate. The buildings should really be in the background, not the foreground. And and then it completely we re-engaged with the canal, and we made sort of a mix of different types of uses along the canal, improved the footpaths and planting and benches and artwork, and actually I think Argent learned a lot from that they then applied to King's Cross. If you think about it, that's all the same ingredients, and now they're applying it to Brent Cross, and it's about learning lessons about the place, and the place is the client. And if you just kind of work with the place and work with the community, then the outcome will always be a better one, I think.
Absolutely. I love that the place as the client and the community as the client, your people are as the client. So coming back to the community. So the LDN Collective recently launched a social value offer. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that, and how can people who may be interested in learning about your services, how they can get involved?
Sure, yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting. Social value has become almost a profession within itself, because people have recognised that there is a value creation, and particularly the local government have recognised that there's a value creation from new development that can address a lot of social problems that might exist, whether that's about different types of employment opportunities, whether it's about improving health outcomes, physical and mental health, and how training, skills, education, and how new development can be planned from the outset in order to achieve that. And actually, these days, there's a lot of different methodologies out there, but most of them recognize that if you try to achieve something, whether that's sort of simple things like types of apprenticeships, or whether it's about reducing loneliness or obesity levels, and then you set yourself targets over periods of time, you can measure that, and actually you can see whether you've done what you set out to do. And if people trust that you can and you've done it before, then they're much more likely to be go with you on that journey, because they'll see that it will be a better world for their kids. It'll be the community will be stronger as an outcome of regeneration, essentially. And so I think from our point of view, that's how we go about doing social value, is really kind of mapping and understanding the needs of the stakeholders as well as the community, and then seeing how a new development can help address that, and making some tangible commitments to do that, and then measuring it, and actually and then playing that back. And that's why I think the LDN Collective is so powerful from that point of view, because we've got we've got great communications and place branding companies like Concept Culture. We've also got community engagement specialists like ECF. We've got online engagement platform Commonplace. We have Tim Ashwin, who does a lot of the modeling around socioeconomics, and then we've got some fantastic urban designers and architects that really understand uh, how to propose urban design interventions that can achieve these social outcomes, um, and how to communicate that, whether that's through drawings or diagrams, or workshops and round tables. And we're able to kind of facilitate all of that and bring all those people together with the client, the developer, with the local authority, with the community, which is sort of quite an art in itself to get all those conversations flowing. Like we did that in the City of London, and it was fascinating. People don't realise how many people actually do live in the City of London, more than you think. But particularly the people that work there, that knew post-COVID that they needed something different from the city and wanted to be involved in that conversation, helping to shape the future of the city, as with culture and green space, and in more inclusivity and mixed demographics and so on. So yes, it's a really interesting whole space that.
Yeah, I think the offer does sound like the whole package in terms of the various elements that the collective does offer, and on the back of um, the success of the City of London 2040 plan, I think when it went to committee, it was unanimously agreed. Is there something you want to share on that?
Well, apart from the fact that we were delighted, um, the City of London team are excellent. Their sort of planning, urban design, community engagement team they have in-house, and very collaborative actually. And we work really well together with them, and that was important. And it was very creative. The whole process was very creative, and they were really open-minded about putting ideas out there about the future of Smithfield, the future of St Paul's, the future of the area around the Tower of London, and what could be different. And people aren't stupid. People can tell when they're actually having a meaningful conversation or not. And if they feel like they are, then they're going to get involved and start coming up with sometimes crazy ideas, but more often than not, really good ideas that a design team probably would never have thought of. And so there's lots of interesting things happening in the city now off the back of that direction of travel of the 2040 plan, around retrofit, around destination city, and culture and leisure, and how do you plan for that, and how do you reuse existing buildings and structures? Because obviously, with climate change and with the embodied carbon issue, that's massively important everywhere, but especially high density places that already exist, like the city, that want to transform themselves. It's the same for these big mega structures like shopping centres and so on. That you need to work with the fabric to reduce the carbon footprint.
That's so exciting. That's 2040, so almost like another 15 years before we may see it materialize.
I think a plan is more about the journey and what
Mhm.
happens along the way than it is about the destination and how it ends up. If because it's all about the direction of travel, and that's what a good plan is. Because a good plan can change, and it will change. I have no doubt about that. They'll do different versions and variations, because nobody predicted COVID, and look what the impact that had on
That's
on the
true.
way we live, and in terms of the way we work, the way we communicate through technology. It's just incredible. So you can't really plan
Mm.
other than having the good direction of travel.
That's so true. I mean, like you said, COVID has changed the way we've lived, probably irreversibly. We're not gonna go back. It doesn't look like, particularly on the work from home debate that a lot of people are battling with. But yeah, noted on your point about like it's more about the journey than the destination. And the other thing that I quite liked about what you said earlier is like people aren't stupid, and I think a lot of maybe practitioners have fallen prey to that notion that, okay, this community engagement is just a box ticking exercise, and they don't invest in it in the way that it should be, that or see the value of it. So what would you say to people who don't see the value in community engagement?
Well, I think our industry is really quite bizarre in many ways because I can't think of many other industries that don't see the value of listening to the consumer. And every other industry, put all of their time and effort into understanding the consumer and listening to them.
Absolutely.
And
Consumer testing, market testing, so focus
yeah,
groups. Yeah.
absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
it's fashion, film, whatever industry it is, science. It's all about responding to the needs. But for some reason, sort of planning, and I think maybe it's because historically it was done in such a kind of closed sort of setting in a town hall with just a few people making decisions and rolling out grand plans. It's had a harder time coming round to this notion that it's a good thing to listen to people and to work collaboratively. I mean, obviously that is changing. It's changed a lot since COVID, and there's been some really interesting kind of social movements that have helped with that in terms of about things like inequality and understanding inequality and how that the built environment has a big role to play in that. I think there's an increased recognition that these things are important and shouldn't be done behind closed doors. So I think that we're on the direction of travel from that point of view is good, but I think it needs to really kind of ramp up, and people need to be seen as part of wider design teams right from the outset. Not just developing a design or a scheme, but actually the brief. It's the brief that's important. And then because you can respond to a brief in a number of different ways, but the brief has to set the foundations for what it is we're all trying to achieve over the next 3, 5, 10 years, in a place, and what can achieve and what we can achieve within those time frames. And it's not always going to be one developer delivering everything. So you've got to have, we used to say it's about like a jigsaw puzzle. People have the different pieces, but you have a picture on the box, and someone's got to kind of do the picture on the box. And once you have that vision, then people can put their piece in, and over different periods of time, and depending on land ownership or depending on viability or market demand or whatever. But at least everyone knows that there's a vision, which is actually showing the leadership. It's often the vision that should lead, I think.
I love that. And I love the analogy of the picture on the box. So we have a picture, and that vision is that picture, and now we all have little parts to play and pieces to make up. So that's a great way to segue into the next part of our conversation, which is all about storytelling. So yeah, this is the title of the podcast. It's about placemaking and storytelling. So coming to storytelling, in your view, what are the key factors that we should be considering as practitioners when we are sharing stories of the places that we are creating and celebrating?
Okay. Well, I think I don't know. Maybe it's because I've got Irish roots, but I always think that it's almost in the genes is when it comes to like storytelling. I think that it was only a few generations ago the Farrell family where they were actually tinkers that used to earn their food and drink by telling stories or playing instruments, and when they were traveling. And it's that kind of thing is really interesting because it becomes part of a way of life about I loved your quote that you sent in the brief about people don't remember facts, but they remember stories. I think that's just spot
Absolutely.
on,
Yeah.
and that's why people love film and love books, and we are as a species. There's a great book called *Sapiens*. I don't know if you've read it, but it's all about the fact that human beings have evolved in many ways as a result of storytelling, and that's how we've developed in the way we have and become more sophisticated and collective in our actions. Um, but yeah, I think a good story has a narrative, and I think that having a narrative is really about it's not just about like having a beginning, middle, and end, but for a place. In a way, it is about having a beginning, middle, and end because, like, that where we are now is like the middle, and then the beginning is about understanding how we got to where we are now, in terms of understanding the history of a place and how it's evolved. And, I mentioned earlier my dad's book about London, and there's a whole chapter about the lost rivers of London and how they have influenced the urban form and the pattern of development within London that people wouldn't necessarily know unless you kind of dig deep into that and understand it. But it actually is very informative about the way that you then can plan real estate, property development, and placemaking. So there's this sort of understanding the past and how we've got to where we are today, understanding the issues that we're all facing that might be sort of commonly well understood, but it still needs articulating, and it still needs because that's in a way is the starting point then for what are we going to do about the future, and actually taking people on that journey about the potential that regeneration can bring to an area, whether that's through improved infrastructure, public realm, diversity of uses, green space, you know, telling that story both through words but also critically visually as well, I think, and not just from sort of plans. It's got to be things that really resonate with people, and whether that's, I'm a great believer in the power of film. And as you know, we've got a brilliant filmmaker, Lawrence, and who's been doing some films for us over the years, and they've been really powerful, like with the campaigns that we've done and projects and so on. But I think, I think an approach to storytelling has to also be very specifically about, that place, and
Mm.
and I think that's where I think you're very good at understanding how a particular place, the story you tell, is always going to be different, and your starting point has got to be what's there, but actually you have to use that to then articulate how the future might be a brighter one, because stories are always, we don't want bad endings in our industry, do we? So we want to be optimistic about the future, and think about, how things could improve if we work together collectively to achieve that. So yeah, I think we have, as you know, we've got someone in the collective who is an expert in semiotics, and that is really interesting because that's all about understanding different sort of symbolism and words and colors and how they resonate with different cultures and demographics and that's all part of it as well. And I think you know it's a fascinating area.
Oh, absolutely. And just like you said, no two places are the same, so no two stories are the same either. But I share the same optimism with you that hopefully all these stories that we're creating and these places that we're telling do have eventual happy endings, or the right appropriate ending for that place and its people. Like we can't all live in Disneyland, where all stories have a happy ending. Um, uh, but anyway, talking about happy endings and future gazing. So to sum up our entire conversation, what would you say now in 2025 is the biggest challenge our built environment sector is facing in delivering inclusive and sustainable places? And do you have a call to action for the industry? Like, you know, let's get our shit together now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm not sure I can do better than that, to be honest. I think we need to sort of turbocharge collaboration,
Mm,
and I think we need to really understand and protect the values and understanding what you know. The great thing about the LDN Collective is the only thing that ties us all together really is yes, we have this sort of quite different type of business model, but it's about the shared values, and that is critically important because that if you share values and you have mutual respect, then you can get through the bad times as well as the good times and come out the other end. Because on the journey of property real estate regeneration, there's inevitably going to be good times and bad times and pressurized situations and actually that's when you're sort of your alignment in terms of values becomes really, really important. And the values of the LDN Collective are about not just about being collaborative, that's critical, but also about being beyond thinking beyond profit, and
mm,
that's really fundamental, really. And that's why we often do a lot of sort of thought leadership and sort of voluntary propositional ideas that often lead on to projects and get us in front of clients. So it's not kind of entirely altruistic, but it's a way of acting and behaving that is not entirely sort of driven by profit and in the conventional sense. It's about, trying to do good things collectively for to make the world a better place.
absolutely. So collaboration, shared and aligned values to make the world a better place. And like I said earlier, I'm very proud and excited to be part of the LDN Collective and a part of a group of people who, as you said, think beyond profit. Like, I mean, profit is inherently isn't inherently bad. It does get a lot of bad press, but it's about thinking about those bigger interventions, those bigger moves beyond profit that will really move the needle and make a lasting generational change. So, what's next for Max Farrell? What's next for the LDN Collective?
Well, there's quite a few interesting things we're working on at the moment. Obviously, I mentioned our sort of garden community in Huntingdonshire we're working on as part of that team, but we're also quite heavily involved with Waits, the developer contractor, family owned, on developing this new type of modular housing that is basically movable but can be built quickly and high quality to house families that are currently on the waiting list for permanent council homes and are in living in these horrible conditions in bed and breakfasts or hostels, and there's a massive cost not just to them in terms of their mental and physical health, not knowing whether they're going to be able to stay there from one day to the next, not having their own bathroom, not having any, sharing a very cramped space that's very unsuitable. To be able to kind of build modular quality homes that can be leased to councils that they then own, and then they can move and actually can start to address all this. But the financial cost to the councils is unbelievable. I mean, it's
Mm.
increasingly it's driving some of them to the verge of bankruptcy. So we've just submitted planning, as we're part of the team that LDN Collective have our MMC advisors, project managers, cost consultants, better delivery, as well as our structural engineers, Conisbee, working in a project that we've just submitted planning in East London with HTA, the architects, and we're now looking to sort of roll that out. We've been working with them on a playbook that can be used by others to inform their own solution. So looking at the design of these things, how to make them demountable, things like piles that screw in the ground that can be unscrewed, or but also about the integration with landscape, with play areas, with wider public services, how all of that can work is quite complex, but equally, if we can get it right, and it can be solve a massive problem. That the temporary accommodation crisis is the sharp end of the housing crisis. That is having a really awful impact on a lot of families. I mean, just to give you one statistic, there's 1 in 4
23.
children in London now that don't have a permanent home, and that's
Oh
the
gosh.
equivalent of one in every classroom, uh, or thereabouts. So it's something that we desperately need to do something about. So I'm really excited about that. We're going to be launching our playbook. Waits are hosting an event in later in February. I'm not sure when this podcast is going out, but if it hasn't gone out by then really looking forward to that, and hopefully that'll be the start of a wider movement of other people picking up the baton, designing, delivering these types of accommodation. That because the problem at the moment in terms of viability and the cost of building the permanent homes means things are being delayed. And on these bigger regeneration projects, there's always sites that aren't nothing going to happen on them for years. And so why not have some of these modular, movable homes for families that can be safe, secure, and become an asset for the council. So that, as you can probably tell, is something that I feel very passionately about and I'm really excited about, and it could be a kind of one of the most important things I've done in my career, I think.
Well, like you said, that was a rallying cry for this movement, modular movable housing, if I remember correctly. But how can our listeners get more involved with this new movement and the London LDN Collective, sorry, generally?
Sure. Well, we often have events that are open to the public, and you've been involved in some of them more recently, and they're on different topics. So recently we had some really good events about AI and the impact that will have on our industry and on community engagement, and looking to do more in the new year. And just I would say get in touch. We've got contact details on the website, but also on our social media channels. We're on LinkedIn and X and Instagram, but also keep an eye out on the projects that we're involved in, because if you're in communities, for example, one other project that I'm excited about this year is we've got a big team now lining up for as part of a consortium in the Royal Docks. So if you live in Newham, then watch this space, because we've got some really exciting plans for a mixed use destination led project there in the Royal Docks that's large scale, and very excited about that. So yeah, I think there's lots of ways of getting in touch.
That's exciting. And sign up for the newsletter as well.
Exactly. Oh yeah. Yeah.
No, but that's all very, very exciting, and I wish you and the LDN Collective the very best. And as a group, we're doing a lot of good work, both at individual company level, but also collectively, as you say. But thanks so much, Max, for sharing all your insight. That kind of concludes the more serious side of our conversation, and now we'll move into our fun little segment that we
Okay.
call Know Your Neighborhood.
Oh God. Okay.
No, don't worry. Nothing to worry about. So your designated neighborhood is Queen's Park in West London. So it's a short little quiz. I'll mention 3 facts, and all you have to do is say whether they're true or false. And you
Okay.
can also elaborate on your reasoning.
Okay. Can I go and
But
get my
let's
book
just
from
have fun.
Queen's Park?
No cheating, no Googling.
Oh,
I can see if your eyes drop. But yeah, I love this part because it also helps me learn about new places. So it's just an added bonus and a little
yeah.
fun as well. And
Okay.
our listeners will learn more about Queen's Park too.
Okay.
All right, are you ready?
Yeah.
All
Go
right,
for it.
let's go. All right. So, fact number 1. The Queen's Park area was once called Kilburn New Town before being renamed.
I think that is true.
That is true. You're right. So the area was originally known as Kilburn New Town, but was renamed Queen's Park in honor of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee.
Yes,
Yeah.
when she visited, and the park was waterlogged because it rained so much, but she still came. But they
Oh,
had
wow.
to lay out lots of sort of timber walkways for her to walk around the park, apparently.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good story. See, now that's a good story.
yeah.
I'm sure
There we
people will
go. Yeah,
remember that.
storytelling.
Cool. All right. One for one. So our second fact is, the area was a site for early 20th century housing experiments aimed at improving living conditions for working class families in London.
Wow. Well, I hope that is true. I don't actually know whether that's true or not, but that would be brilliant if that was true, because I think that sounds really quite a good thing to have done. But,
That is true,
right.
according to our internet search, and it was part of early housing reforms in the UK in the
Really?
20th
Oh,
century.
well, there you go. We learn something
Yeah.
every day. Yeah.
All right, two for two. Wow, you're on a winning streak. So our third and final fact is, and this is a very interesting one, uh, Queen's Park Community Council, or QPCC, is London's first and only community council.
I don't think that's true.
That is actually, in fact, true, and I was quite intrigued to learn this as well. And okay, well, at least this is what the internet tells me. So the
It's the
QPCC,
only community council.
yeah, Parish Town Council in London,
Wow.
and it is a statutory body and the first layer of government,
Yeah.
distinct and independent from other tiers of government, such as the borough,
Yeah. Yeah.
city council, and the
I
and the
didn't
GLA.
realize that. I thought there were more. Okay.
This
Well,
is why I thought this fact was really interesting.
yeah, that
So
is
hopefully
interesting.
the internet hasn't betrayed me, but but I thought it was quite cool.
Yeah, I mean, I do like the community council. They do
Yeah,
some interesting initiatives, and
yeah,
I just assumed that others would have them. But yeah, well, that's really interesting actually, because it's a model that I think should be replicated. For example, I'll just give you one example in terms of
sure.
like bottom up regeneration. That's
Yeah,
the council is can be credited for. Is we have a lot of tree lined streets where there's been a real problem around the area, the earth pit around the trees tends to get quite neglected and also end up with a lot of dog mess and litter. And so people started taking it upon themselves to put little sort of wooden picket fences and creating mini gardens at the base of the tree and planting plants and flowers, which stopped the dogs from going into them, but also suddenly looked much nicer and more attractive. And so the Queen's Park Community Council started putting certificates on the trees and saying they've won awards. And then others started popping up, and before you know it, now you see like half the street has them on every street around where I am in the conservation area, and now every year at the Queen's Park Festival in the smaller park, they give out a plant to everyone that's made one of these things, and you can go and choose your own plant. And for me, that's kind of like democracy in action, but also kind of how the public good has really kind of come out of bottom up initiatives, guerrilla style.
grassroots. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's such a heartwarming story to end on. Well, Max, thank you so much for your time, for your insights. There's a lot of gold nuggets in there, and I'm sure those who are listening will get a lot of value out of this conversation. So, all that's left for me to do is to thank you for joining me to talk about place.
thank you, Tanisha, and it's a pleasure working with you and getting to know you and as a friend too. So yeah, I enjoyed that, and good luck with the rest of your podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Max, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to join the conversation on social media with the hashtag #TalkingPlace. I would also love for you to leave our podcast a review and subscribe to all our podcast and YouTube channels so you don't miss an episode. There is so much more to explore when it comes to creating good places, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into other topics with you in our next episode. I'm Tanisha Raffiuddin, and it's been my pleasure to be your podcast host. Thank you for listening. See you again next time, where we'll continue talking place.